Look at these beauties. Man, they're gorgeous. 2.5 inch, or at least that's what it says, piggyback reservoirs. Yes, Icon rear suspension with the reservoirs. It is awesome. And that's what we're doing today, is we are doing a rear suspension lift on the Tundra. I did front suspension in the last episode. This is part 2. If you want to see the front suspension, how that is, I'll put a link to it down in the description below. But today we are doing, boom. So today we're primarily focusing on the rear suspension, and we are going to be doing leaf springs and shocks upgrades. For the most part, we're also going to be extending the brake lines and a few other things along those lines. So let's get started. First things first, we have to lift up this rear end. We are going to support it on the frame, and then we're going to let the axle droop almost all the way down so that we can undo a lot of that suspension work. Then we are going to have to let the axle droop all the way down and disconnect it from the current springs. So this is going to be a fun one. I'm going to show you guys how to do all that. Don't forget to break the tires loose before you lift the vehicle up. So here's what I did, is I supporting it underneath the frame here, holding the vehicle up on the rear, and then I added jack stands underneath the axle to hold the axle so it's not at full droop. But I did, you could probably see this, but I did lower the axle way down, and actually I lowered the truck down so that when we have to move things around, lift things up, change it out, that axle is close to the ground already, and we don't have to change it too much. All right, so we're working on the carrier bearing right now, and we're going to be putting a spacer underneath this carrier bearing. The carrier bearing is a joint, for the most part, between the drive shafts. So this side right here is going up to the T-case, and this side back here is going to the differential. And it's just the bearing in the middle of it. And so we're going to pop out the 2 bolts here, and we're going to put these spacers inside to lower it down just a hair. This will give us a better drive shaft angle on the rear differential since we're doing this lift. So I'm just going to get the drill out, pop these guys loose. I got a jack under here to catch the drive shaft for when it goes down, and then hopefully I got it low enough that we can fit those spacers in there. I'm going to let it down slowly so that we can just drop it onto that jack. There's that one. All right, there we went onto the jack. Perfect. All right, let me grab spacer number 1. I'll just push it through, and I'll just finger tighten it up there. We did blast some PB Blaster on here a little earlier just to make sure that everything was breaking loose, and it looks like I'm glad we did. Number 2. Always want to make sure twists in with your fingers before you use the impact driver. Don't want to cross thread anything. Alright, going back up. There we go. Carrier bearing drop is done. So this is a super basic and really easy install. And really what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding a spacer right here that holds the ABS up. And right up there, that's going to elevate the brake lines. And then this guy, it's a little awkward, I'm laying on the ground. That guy right there, and swatch camera. This guy right here. We're just going to be adjusting the way that it's mounted. So for the most part, we're just going to be flipping the mounting bracket upside down. And that's really about it. So let me show you what we're up to. So what we're going to be doing now is, since we've got the axle sitting on the jack stands, we're going to undo the leaf springs by undoing the bolts on both of the ends and the U bolts here. Then when we have those loose, we're going to be undoing the shocks as well. And then we're going to lift the whole truck up. That way it'll lift these leaf springs pretty much off of the vehicle, off of the axle, and the axle will stay sitting right here on the jack stands. Then we can swap these out with the new leaf springs that we've got. Alright, so we loosened all the nuts off the bottom of these U-joints, and then these things just slide right off. So here's the base, and then we can probably just pull these the U-bolts off. Oh, they're a little tight. There's one. And here's the other. Oh, let go. And here's a nice, big, beautiful bump stop. We can remove that as well. All right, so now these leaf springs are free. We're still, we're loose on each one of these ends of the leaf spring. So we're gonna lift the vehicle up and we're gonna have this leaf spring separate from the axle. Oh, but first we're gonna undo the shocks. That's our next step, undo the shocks. 17 millimeter here on the shock. I'm just gonna, we didn't lube this one up, so I'm gonna use this breaker bar. Oh yeah, right job, right, correct tool for the right job. Always nice. Okay, yep, all right. There we go, vice grips. Right on the tip, just how we like it, on the tip. There we go. So what I found here is when you take the top bolt off, there's not enough room actually to pull this bushing off of there at all. So I'm undoing the bottom, which I've already done, and we can just pop that out, and then that gives you the room for to get the bushing out of there. So that's how you get your shocks off. Old Pro Eagle. Alright, let's go up. Let's see what we got. Alright, good. Yep.
Keep going?
We're going.
That's nice. Jack.
Alright, hold there. We're still on. Alright, we're off on both sides. So let's start loosening these leaf springs and we should be able to see what we can get. We did have a little rotation of the drive shaft, so we might want to grab another jack and go, or I mean, we could do the floor jack under there. That might work good. All right, so now that we have everything supported, we lifted the truck up a little bit more, and we've got a gap underneath here. We are going to take the rest of the leaf spring bolts out on both ends and see what gap we get. We might need to lift, or we are probably going to need to lift the vehicle higher because the new leaf springs do have a bit more of an arc to them, but we want to keep everything close and tidy while we are disassembling it. All right, so we've already got this side completely undone and bolts out and everything. We are loose here, just lying on the axle. And so now we just have this other side to go over here. Let's see. Yep, I can still get that. So up here, the way that this one works is it's got a bolt that goes to the shackle and then a bolt that comes through the top. Both of those bolts are attached to that far side of the shackle. So we've got to remove this side of the shackle and then slide the leaf springs off. So that's what we're up to now. There you go. So we're installing the yellow polys from the Old Man Emu on these leaf springs for the Old Man Emu springs. And what we did is we actually got the spring hanger kit. And so it's a greasable bushing setup here that with this greasable bolt, one side's gun drilled all the way back, the other side's capped off. And then there's some holes in here that will push up and through. The longer ones, which is the 317, it says on there. I don't know if that will focus. It's really kind of faint and hard to read. But the longer versions will be going up on the top on the shackles. And then there are the 282s that go down here on the lower part of the shackles. And then there's a 333 version that go on the front, and we use one of the sleeves that's provided for that one. The front one's not going to be greasable, but we are probably going to change it out in the future to make it a greasable one, just so for better longevity for the polys. So we pulled out, we had to drop the tire down. Let's see, I got them right here. And we pulled out the old shackles, and so now we're going to be replacing those with the new ones. One thing I'd like to note is that we are going to be using the Lucas Red and Tacky. We did a little bit of research on what specific lubricant or grease you want to be using for these poly bushings. And it looked like a lot of it was very conflicting. But what we found was a lot of them just said, go get the Lucas Red and Tacky. And so that's what we did. And we actually found it at Walmart. That was the closest place to me. And so that's what we're using. We're just greasing them up first by hand. Then we'll push them in. It'll help us slide these into the leaf springs. And then we'll grease them when everything's up in there and make sure that it's all lubricated appropriately. So Lucas Red and Tacky, go get that one for these. So when installing the leaf springs, the shackle, the big sides wraps around the frame. And so what we did is we put that up with the bolt. We made sure to fit the zerk fitting side on the outside of the frame, so then it'll be easy for us to fill it with grease. Otherwise, the other side will be blocked by the tire. So we set that side up, bolted it together, but left the other side off. Then when we lifted up the leaf spring and put it up into place, then we were able to snap everything else back on. The main reason for doing that is because if you put the other shackle on, you won't be able to fit the lower bolts on there because it's got to go in between the two shackles. Mainly because these are beefier where for the sleeve area. So you can't set it up so that it won't slide through. So you've got to have one side off completely. Besides that, just make sure you're putting the right bushings in the right places, and it's fairly easy to go up and in. We're gonna set the back side up first because that allows us to swing it forward and it'll hold the weight, and then we'll push the front in. So one thing I'd like to point out is that there's an arrow here on the leaf spring, and so this is the front one. So this one's going to be on the hanger that's right underneath the cab with this pointed forward. So just make sure you're putting these leaf springs in the right orientation. You good?
Yeah. Is it supposed to go over or under that?
I go under this. So up on your end, down on mine. You gotta go.
The exhaust.
What? You gotta go.
We gotta go all the way back and then feed it to you and then flip it over.
Oh, the exhaust is totally in the way. We could also come my direction, probably.
Yes, hang on. Probably should turn it the other way. Here, you hold the whole thing.
There we go. That was a little bit more difficult than it needed to be.
Alright, up.
Ready?
Yeah.
Yep, there you go. Boom. Put the nut on the backside. Leaf springs are hung with care. So right now the leaf springs are just hovering just a little bit, which is perfect because that pin we've got to drop into the hole, the center hole of that leaf spring perch. So we actually might need to move the axle around just a little bit to match up with that pin. It looks like the pin is about a solid inch back from where it was stock. So that's a little interesting. I'm curious how that's going to work out when we put the bigger tires on. So one thing I want to point out here, and I'll see if I can get a good, I don't know if I can get it. Right here, there's an RH. And on the other side, there was an LH. So you need to make sure that this is a right side and a left side. And mainly because it looks like the leaf springs are a little pigeon-toed in the rear, or sort of dovetailed-ish. And so that gives an angle on this platform. So when you're putting this up against the underside of the axle, you want to make sure you've got the right side because then you'll have the right angle. If you're running into a problem where the angle doesn't fit, that means you've got the wrong piece on the wrong side. We're just going to push these up and thread them in. We still have all of the bolts for the leaf springs loose, so we were able to slide those in and get everything to line up fairly easily. Now that the vehicle's down, we'll probably tighten all that up. Doing a little cross pattern just to make sure we get everything. I'll just double check it. Here we go, 30 foot-pounds, all four. So this guy we're tightening up to whoa, we're sliding off. Tightening up to 77 foot-pounds. A lot tighter than the rear ones. There we go, 77 foot-pounds. So we're installing the rear shocks here on the rear axle, and the Icon's washers here actually have two different size internal holes. So the one that is larger goes on the top, and it will go over the larger bore there. And then you're going to put in the rubber grommet. We're going to put the flat side with the little raised part up on the top. That way when we add the one on the other side, we're going to have a little gap in there, and that gap's going to be for the plate that's part of the frame. So that's all we're going to be doing on that section. Now just don't forget you want to keep these spacers in there at all times. Don't lose them. We just undid the zip ties that Icon provides. So we're going to slide this up on the inside here and then bring it back down on the bottom. So we're just going to line it up here on the bottom. Slip down a little bit. There we go. Push it all the way through. Please, sir. All right, and then we're gonna just thread the bolts on here in the bottom, and then you tighten this down to 66 foot-pounds. It's a 17 millimeter. Okay. So there's a huge gap right here, and when we measured from the bottom of the eyelet to the top of this plate, we got about 30 inches, but because there's this big gap, and we're at full droop right now, we're gonna jack the axle up, and that's gonna push this through the top so then we can tighten that down. But we're probably going to need, or we are going to use limiting straps on this, and we're going to have to get those at another date. We'll give you an update on the size that we're going to need once we get this all together, but mainly because this doesn't even come close to getting out of the top of this. So we're at full droop and we've got room to go, and so we're going to need limiting straps because of that. All right, so now we just jacked the vehicle up, and now I've got the thread sticking through the top here. So what we're going to do is we're going the flat side down, just matching the other side. Make sure to press that all the way down because we're just going to have a few threads. Washer then next on the top. And now I'm just going to pry down. My hand's probably blocking everything. But I'm just threading that nut on the top because there's only a few threads. You kind of have to compress everything. There we go. So now we tighten this down to 21 foot-pounds. All right, so we got the shocks in place, and when we did a full droop on the shocks, it measures 28 and a quarter of an inch at full droop. And that was from the bottom of the bracket. That's down here. We measured it from down here, and then we measured it to this section, pretty much right flat in the middle, kind of in line. And then when we did full droop with just the springs, no shocks, we got 30 inches. So that's roughly 1 3/4 inches difference there. So what we're going to definitely need to order some limiting straps, and that we'll do another video on that and tell you how to figure all that out. But this is something that you need to take into account when you're installing these shocks, that you're going to need some limiting straps. I'm extremely pleased with how this rear suspension went together. The hardest part was really pretty much just how heavy those Old Man Emu leaf springs are. Once you got those up into place, everything went together really well. If you want to see a link on setting up the ABS lines and extending the brake lines, I'll put a link to that 2-Minute Tuesday video down here. If you want to follow along with this Tundra build, I'll put the playlist right up here on the top. Don't forget to subscribe so you can keep track of everything we got going here on Snail Trail 4x4 with all these Toyota builds. And don't forget, keep crawling.